Okay, so welcome everybody. My name is Mary Rotundo, and a day before Halloween, we are going to talk about our awesome faculty and their hauntingly clever approach to peer review. So what we have today is a couple of faculty members from the Davie campus who have been coming to our office and sharing with us a lot of the best practices, a lot of their best practices, and this is definitely one of them. Um, in having conversations with them, I just had the idea of inviting them over and having them tell us about why they do this, how they do it, and what it brings into the classroom, what it brings in terms of the benefits, not only for themselves, but for the students. So let me tell you who they are today. Here is Dr. Louisa Rogers from the Business Communications program here at FAU. And in the Boca campus, we have Dr. Michael Crane, also from the FAU College of Business, but he is from the School of Accounting. So let's talk about what our objectives will be today. So basically, we're going to compare their two perspectives when it comes to implementing peer reviews. And we will find out that underlying these differences, there is a common pedagogical value for doing peer review. So as we're going to be comparing, we'll also be talking about how these two approaches, what these two approaches have in common. All right.
Okay.
And we also have...
Who's here to learn.
Here to learn, because we're talking about wanting to do these in one of these online classes. So experimenting, learning from people who have done it before, and just seeing what they have to say. And we would like this to be a very conversational session, so to our online attendees and the people here in the room with us, please feel free to join the conversation.
Good.
Okay. So we're going to start with you, Dr. Crane, if you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and then go into your presentation.
Okay, sure. This is Michael Crane. I have my office in the Davie campus, but currently I'm in the Boca campus, so that's the reason I'm not sitting in the room there with Mary and the others. I'm affiliated with the School of Accounting, and I teach graduate programs. Most of my courses that I teach are in the School of Accounting executive programs, which is part-time working students. And in addition to that, I teach some other graduate programs from courses in the School of Accounting. I've been using peer review for perhaps a couple of years, and I've learned a few things about what tends to work and what tends not to work, and I've adapted my learning experience to try to improve the peer review process in the courses that I teach. And I don't use peer review in every assignment. I use only certain assignments, and I'll be happy to talk about that a little bit later. So that's me in a nutshell. Back to you, Mary.
Dr. Rogers?
Hi, I'm Louisa Rogers. I'm in the College of Business Communications program, and I'm down here in the Davie campus. I teach the Business Communications course for undergraduate students. It's a requirement for graduation. All third and fourth year students have to take the course. And I also teach, as Mike does, in the executive programs the School of Accounting. As a matter of fact, Mike and I developed a course together, I think 2 years ago, Mike, Writing for Business Valuation, about 2 years ago. And I teach the Writing for Forensic Accountants, and a brand new course that I developed is running for the first time this semester, Writing for Professional Accountants. But those are completely online. The undergraduate courses are face-to-face.
Okay. So we have these professional development sessions every Monday, but we wanted to have the voice of faculty being heard. So we wanted to have faculty telling other faculty about things they're passionate about, and this is one of them. So Dr. Crane, we would like to start with some of your philosophy for doing peer review.
Sure. The peer review assignments that I've done so far have been in the executive program, School of Accounting executive program. And to a large degree, I've designed the courses that I teach to make them as applicable to the real world as possible by giving assignments that would tend to be used by students if they were working in the area. So instead of theoretical assignments, I give assignments that are actually used in practice, that they may use in the real world in a job. And simply speaking, they tend to be more intense. The assignments tend to be more in-depth than some of the traditional assignments that you might give to your students. Consequently, by making it real-world assignments, they tend to be longer. Some of them are in groups because they are longer, and because they're real-world type problems, there's more than one way to address the same problem. Mm-hmm. So the student or group of students perform the assignment, and they obviously learn from that experience. But the peer review gives the student another perspective of seeing how another student or another group of students approach the same problem. And if they happen to be doing more than one peer review, they're getting the experience of how they approach the problem and how one or more other students or student groups approach the problems. And the feedback that I have is that it was a great learning experience, and they saw some things outside of doing it themselves. And I think that there's a great value in the peer review process for these kind of assignments at least.
Okay, so I remember we talked about exemplary work too here when you and I were talking about this.
Right. I prepared some slides that kind of direct the conversation. Would you like for me to go through that?
Oh, no, I remember you saying that not only they're exposed to different approaches to solving a problem, but they're also exposed to quality that probably is better than what they would have done by themselves.
Right. I think in that regard, by a student or student group reviewing other work, they're likely exposed to some work that's better than what they performed, mm-hmm. and also work that's below the standards of what they performed. And I think there's learning from both angles of what to do or what not to do, assuming students reflect on all of that work and how to adapt that new knowledge in the peer review process.
Absolutely. Anything you would like to comment?
Yeah, I mean, I basically agree with everything that Mike said. I think it's important for them to see the mm-hmm. work of other students, thus making the dialogue not just student to teacher, mm-hmm. but student to student and students to teacher and teacher back. I think that's really important. I think, yeah, I agree that they get to see stuff that's better than what they did, stuff that's about the same quality, stuff that's not as good, and they begin to appreciate really how people evaluate, for me, their speaking and writing, their communicating skills, and how they're judged. It's not just the teacher judging them, but it has been my experience that the peer review feedback that they get really says pretty much the same thing I have to say. And I make it a point not to give my comments until after the peer reviews are finished, because I don't want to prejudice their comments one way or the other. So they don't see what I have to say until they have finished the entire process.
Yeah. So this is one of the things that I found more striking about what they're doing, is that they have different students provide feedback to the same work, either by a group or by another individual student. But having that multiple perspective actually adds a lot of value to the entire experience. So that would be one of the things, one of the similarities. Dr. Rogers sees her peer review as a writing skill development assignment.
Yes.
So would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I do my peer reviews differently than Mike does. I make my students write letters to each other. They usually review 4 to 5 other students and get reviews from 4 other students or 5 other students, depending on the assignment. And I make them write a letter because it is a business communications course. So I kill, if you will, 2 or 3 birds with one stone. I make them write a letter and format it correctly so it resembles a business letter, dear Mr. So-and-so, with punctuation. I make them create a letterhead for themselves so that they don't have to bother with an inside address. They have a letterhead that they can then use for every peer review letter that they write during the semester. And they communicate with each other. They write a letter, you know, and I make them use their last name, dear Mr. So-and-so, dear Ms. So-and-so. And then they have to write a couple of paragraphs to a student that they're reviewing. And because, unlike me, they only have, let's say, 4 to do, they can really focus on what they want to say to that student. And yes, and I use it as part of the writing that they do for my course.
Okay, so she has a template that she shares with her students, and as a foreign student, I remember wishing that I had someone to teach me all these things. So there's incredible value in having someone who actually takes the time to teach you how to write a business letter. And her assignment doesn't start as a writing assignment. It is an elevator pitch assignment.
Do you want to speak to that?
I really want you to speak about how you turn everything into writing, right? And then
Just the Midas touch. I turn everything into gold. I start my business communications course off with a career module. Module is perhaps too formal, but I start with career writing, the resume. But my very first assignment, like the second day of class, they do this, is an elevator pitch. And as everybody knows, it's how you would sell yourself in a ride up in an elevator, which actually a typical elevator pitch, you really only have maybe 45 seconds. I give them 3 minutes. So it's a slightly longer than a real elevator ride, but you could think of it as something between an elevator pitch and how you would pitch yourself at a table if you were at a job fair. And I do this the second day of class, particularly because nobody knows anybody, they don't know me, and they're really scared to death, and I want them to be nervous. I want them to be as nervous as they would be in a real situation. And just as an aside, interestingly enough, I've been doing this for a while, there's a new program coming on television called Entrepreneur Elevator Pitch. And the students said to me, oh, I thought of you, I thought of you. And I don't know what channel it's on or what time or if it's coming, but the premise is you get to sell yourself in the time it would take to write it. Actually, not so much sell yourself, but your concept, whatever it is. And if you do a good job, you get X amount of money towards whatever business or project you're trying to sell. And so I have them video themselves on their cell phones in front of the classroom doing their elevator pitch. They have 3 minutes maximum, as if they were looking for a job. Pitch yourself, sell yourself. And that's the assignment, and that's their first peer review. So I take a non-written medium and use that for my first written peer review.
Okay, thank you. So, Dr. Crane, my next question is for you.
Can I ask this
Sure,
question?
absolutely.
Yeah, make it an easy one.
Well, look, it's going to be very easy because you've done this a lot of times. I understand, even though I'm only a political scientist, I understand the business elevator pitch thing. But when you give that assignment, do you give them some particular points about what you want the content to be? Do you give them a rubric?
Oh, yeah,
So,
every assignment I have has a rubric.
Okay, so
So
they know
know.
basically what they're supposed to cover.
Absolutely.
Okay, and then they get the peer review, and then do they revise that and then give another elevator pitch?
No,
or-
on this assignment, they don't.
Okay.
But it's actually not a bad idea, and I've thought about doing that. On other assignments, they actually have an opportunity to revise and resubmit. But they have a rubric, and they're told, and there's a whole 2-page assignment attached to this that can be read, which is basically imagine, do you have my slide? I'm particularly fond of this because it took me a while to find the pictures to go. I'm not going to bore you with the text, but how would you present yourself to a potential employer in terms of you want the job? And you need to tell us what the job is and how you're qualified. Not that the two.
The rubric?
Not the rubric. You don't have the two. How exciting? Tell me more. And is this your pitch? You didn't pull that.
It's here.
There it is. So this is the beginning.
I love it.
Right. This is the beginning of the assignment, and there's a whole page and a half of instructions. And so here's how exciting, please tell me more. And then it says, this is the response that you want. And then not that. Is that your pitch? You don't want people going, oh my God, is that what you have to say? And we look at videos ahead of time of some TED Talks and things like that of how to make yourself appealing, how to look good on camera, how to sell yourself, which is really not just your resume. It's not I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this, because that gets boring after the second.
That's a wonderful skill set for anybody to have. As a matter of fact, even though I'm not in business, our students also are looking for careers. I would love it if you could share some of this.
I would be more than happy to share this with you. Thank you.
Wonderful.
So, in our conversations, Dr. Crane, we talked about the challenge of peer review not being the peer review itself, but educating your students, training your students on how to do this. And in the process that you have developed, because you didn't get here by just doing this once, you have created very detailed instructions and rubrics. So how do you communicate your expectations to your students?
Well, where I have adapted and learned is, first of all, announce that the peer review activity is part of their overall assignment. So it sets the expectation that they're going to have to do first their assignment to create content, but part of that assignment and assignment marks is also the peer review. So both are necessary to complete the overall assignment. Now for my assignments, recall I'm in the School of Accounting, so the kind of work that we do is analytical in nature, and specifically it's analytical dealing with some quantitative factors, but then my assignments, they have to write to interpret the data. So there's a quantitative element and a writing element to that, which is the interpretive part, which is really the key feature of all of that. For those assignments, I create a very detailed written document, which I call project documentation, and I have it divided into two parts. The first part is the work that they create, and part two of the assignment is the peer review. And it's in the peer review section that I describe all the necessary work that they need to do. And I also have to describe where they find all of this in Canvas. And by the way, Canvas has features that help you as a faculty member to be able to use peer review. And once you sort of learn the features of Canvas, you can use them, and it makes this peer review process a very much smoother. So I set out the expectations first by saying that the peer review is part of their overall assignment. Secondly, I document what they have to do and where to find it on Canvas. I also have had written a tutorial of how to use Canvas in general to perform peer reviews, and I'm happy to share with all the folks here on the webinar and the program here. If you're recorded, happy to share an example of my detailed instructions and also the tutorial that we've created to give students of how to navigate Canvas and what to do. In addition to all of that, for the peer review, I create a rubric in which the students use, and the rubric is probably how you imagine it. There's different elements and scoring on each of the elements, and the way that Canvas works is the instructor needs to describe the rubric element and then a scoring for each of that, and the student is scoring each of the elements. So we have first element, second element, third element, and the students are evaluating the submission by each rubric and providing a score. And the scores are points, and the points add up to the overall assignment points. One thing that I've discovered in working all of this is that there's been a few students who tend to not give as much attention as I believe to the peer review process, and they may just try to do their peer review quickly and provide the score quickly and then be done with the peer review process. And usually when that happens, they're giving the maximum score. To try to get the students to slow down and take this more seriously, I've used a feature in Canvas that not only has the rubric element and the score, but there's also a feature in Canvas that allows the student to write a comment in addition to the score for each of the elements. And I make it part of my required part of the peer review to not only score the review on each element, but also to write a comment to justify their score to each element. And I have, and I'll show you a little bit later, assuming we have time, examples of how I do this in terms of the rubric and in terms of describing the content for each element. Mary?
Wonderful. So we have all these files uploaded already, and if we have time, we can go and show any of those, your template, anything that you would like.
This is very impressive. You folks have gone so far down the road beyond what I've done. I've just had some graduate seminars where I've had to give verbal feedback, and this is terrific.
So giving the students a voice, giving them a place, and setting up expectations. There's a couple more things that I would like to talk about, and Dr. Crane, you actually add a participation grade here to the whole process, right?
Correct.
Can you tell us a little bit?
what I do, most students follow instructions, but there's always exceptions, as we know. And I try to learn from those exceptions and then to provide some incentives to try to keep those students from trying to minimize their work or not, maybe even not doing a peer review. So what I've done is, first of all, I said the peer review adds some points to their overall assignment. Now, they're relatively small points, but that's not the bigger objective. But I also have learned that some students just don't care about those points that are awarded in the peer review process. Maybe it's because they're too small, but in addition to providing some points, I also have a penalty provision. And what I say is if the students do not perform their peer review, there's a very big penalty in their overall assignment. Now, my penalty is 50%. So that provides a pretty big incentive for them to do the peer review in addition to their assignment.
Okay.
So once I implemented a penalty provision like that, I've had every student perform the peer review. Then all we've talked about so far is the peer review process in general. What Mary just referred to is in a group setting where the assignments are done in a group, and I'll keep that separate, and maybe we talk about the group projects a little bit later, Mary, unless we want to dive into it right now.
Yes. Let's see if I have. Do we have any questions from our attendees? Anything you guys would like to add?
The only thing, for whatever it's worth, I give 50 points per peer review, so that it's a significant amount of points. And if you don't do it, you just get a 0. I mean, so it solves that problem of who's not going to participate. And maybe you can afford to lose 50 points, but since there are a number of peer reviews, if you start to add them up, you can kill your grade, basically. Yeah. For a moment, can you just pull up? I mean, I want to show my rubric because it's very different. It's a really simple rubric. It's got two items. There it is. Here's my rubric. I mean, so it's 50 points, 25 points for the quality of what they have to say. You know, in other words, that they didn't just, blow off the assignment. And I asked them to write approximately 200 words. I don't do a word count, but, you know, I've been doing this for a lot of years, so I can take a look at a couple of paragraphs and tell it's approximately, 200 words. It's meaningless to say, great job, I liked it. That helps nobody at all. I want details, I want specifics. So there's just 3 items. Either it was accomplished, acceptable, or insufficient, and then below it, for me, because I teach writing, grammar, mechanics. Very simple. So they get whatever points they earn, but if they don't do it, they get 0 points.
Very good.
Would you like to comment on your rubric, Dr. Green? Show your rubric?
Yeah, sure. Let me give you an example of my rubric. I've broken, this is, in this example, I've broken it into 4 elements, as you can see here. And Canvas has some nice features, but for the individual elements here and the categories, there's certain word limitations. And there's another level which I've highlighted here with the arrow, which allows a student to click on that link and get to some of the longer descriptive of what I'm looking for. So let's go through an example. First of all, the assignment is worth 30 points, which you see at the bottom right, and I've broken up the peer review into 4 categories, and the totals for the 4 add up to the 30 points. Canvas has all of this set up with their features to be able to design the rubric in this kind of form. So effectively what the students are going to do in a peer review is, first of all, look at this rubric, and then they're going to look at the hyperlink. I give them instructions, tell them to look at the hyperlink. And so the first element here is analytical qualitative, but that may not be very meaningful, so they're going to click on the hyperlink, and they're going to see set of criteria for the students to evaluate that first factor. Now, this goes to the assignment. This was a very big group assignment. Actually, here the final product was 40 or 50 pages that the students had to create, and this was done over several weeks. And it was a group of students of about 4. So if you want to reduce that down, on average, students were writing about 10 pages over the course of several weeks. And the final work product was actually something that they might do in the real world, getting a job in this particular area. So given the extent that the project, the assignment was very large, and the students were very much informed about this, I had a rubric description, which you see an example of here, which is very detailed. And the students had access to this when they were doing their assignment, so that they knew what they needed to prepare in their submission, in addition to how to evaluate. So let's go back to the sample. So the students look at the rubric, they look at the longer description, and then they're going to, and this is a feature in Canvas, they're going to click on one of those boxes to the right of the factor. Excellent, good, fair, poor, no marks. Student clicks on one of those boxes, and the points are awarded based upon what is clicked, and the total appears over on the right-hand side by Canvas. The students proceed from top to bottom, and there's a final award out of 30 points, and then that gets into the overall assignment. Now, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but this is what each peer reviewer is seeing. So even on a group assignment where, say, 4 students made a submission, the peer reviews, such as the one you see here, are done individually. The peer reviews are not done as a group. So each individual is performing a peer review on a randomly assigned submission that was done. All of this is anonymous. So Right. So I put in my instructions that the submission needs to have a cover sheet with the title of the course, the professor, semester, and all that. But they're not to put their names on the title sheet. They're to put their Z number. And then they submit. So the peer reviewer pulls down the submission, and all they see is a Z number, and they don't know who that is. And as far as the peer review, the instructor has the option in creating all of this to make them anonymous, and that's what I pick. So that means that the peer review is reported back to the submitter as anonymous. So from one perspective, the reviewer does not know the identity of the submitter, and the submitter, after the peer review, does not know the identity of the peer reviewer.
Excellent.
Can you very briefly, because I have something that I would like to ask Dr. Rogers, but can you explain your analogy of the juror?
Sure.
Yes.
One thing that I have done, because of the program here, and I'm using this in the School of Accounting, a particular program in which the students are learning forensic accounting. And one aspect of that discipline is they are going to be reviewing the work of another professional. And a lot of the work is done in a litigation scenario. And what that means is they're sort of acting in a very critical way of evaluating the work of someone else's work and presenting your findings, presenting your critique to a lawyer, and that work may end up in a court of law. So one aspect that I'm doing here is teaching not only how to do a peer review and see how others approach the problem, but I'm also getting them to learn how to critique someone else in a responsible way. What I'm leading up to is I make the results of the peer review part of the submitter's grade. So let's say that we have one submission that has 4 peer reviews, and one submitter, peer reviewer A awards, say, 25 points, peer reviewer B 30 points, C and D, and so forth. All of that's going to go into the actual grade for the submitter. And just on an aside, I use the median. So if there's an outlier, somebody just awarded the max points, or somebody awarded didn't do their job and underestimated the number of points, I end up doing the median. And that way you take care of the outliers, so to speak. So that's the award that's graded. Now, getting to Mary's question, this is a long way back to her question. If we have a student who sort of is complaining about their grade, in my experience, when I've gone back and revisited, I think the use of the median has been quite fair and reasonable, that overall the group of peer reviewers, and there's more than one, there's a group of peer reviewers, I think 3 or 4, the right number, and so I can use the median. The result of all that has been quite fair. So the analogy that I use to a student who complains about their mark is that just like in a court of law, where a panel of jurors tends to get things right, I think that the peer reviewers in this case tend to get it right, and I'm hesitant to overturn the findings of their peers. Now, keep in mind, my students are graduate students that are working, many of them in the practice. That works with this group of students, and it may not work with undergraduates. So I'll put that as a caveat. My students tend to be more informed about the material that I'm teaching, and also graduate students being more informed and treating the peer review process more seriously. So I make the peer review actually very important in the mark that the submitters give.
However, you have come to the same conclusion, right?
Yeah, I do mine differently. I don't have my peer reviews fill out the rubric. They write letters, and mine are not anonymous. They have to own them. They have to sign their names to those letters, because I'm a real firm believer in people need, if you have something to say, then you have to claim ownership of it. You cannot hide behind anonymous. Can you pull up my instructions for the peer review for a moment?
Can you make me the presenter, please? I also wanted to show some of your examples.
Yeah, right. I agree with Mike, though, that the jury, if you will, is always right, because the interesting thing, and Mary has got some examples, I'm not going to bore you with reading through all of them, but it has been my experience that with some rare exception, my peer reviews, the letters that students write, basically they all have the same thing to say, and they all say pretty much what I would have said anyway. Before this, can you give me the feedback instruction? They submit the, in this case, the video into Canvas, and I randomly assign them 4 videos, let's say, to peer review. They don't know who they're going to get until they look at it in Canvas. But if you look down at the bottom, these are the instructions, and there's a link in there with the template that they should follow for the letter. But if you look down at the bottom in red, remember, you are being graded on your feedback. Okay, so their grade for this, their 50 points, is on the letter that they write to the other students, and they have to sign at the bottom of every letter, just like you would any letter. You've got to put your name, sincerely or regards, whoever you are. And then what happens I gave Mary access to a couple of my students, so we have one here that you just have to take my word for it, but every comment that this student got, basically everybody said the same thing, which was the same thing that I said to her. And it's interesting to watch the process unfold. So I agree with Mike that the jury, if you will, is basically right, but he and I approach it differently. And just as a point of information, I do this same peer review process with undergraduates and graduates.
Okay.
Same exact process.
Okay, so we will not have a lot of time for questions. We're out of time. I just have a few final comments that I would very quickly like to share with you. And the way we see it is that there is a change in the mindset of your students where they see this as a work in progress. So it's not a final submission, a submission that has different layers of review, and there's always space for growth. So it is student-directed. They take ownership. And something we didn't get to talk that maybe we'll talk on a second peer review session will be how personal it gets when you write a letter. So there's these contrasting approaches, anonymity versus making it very personal. It all works. So our students are engaging definitely in critical thinking, real world application of their learning. And something else we didn't get to talk about is that there's an improved sense of community. So I have to thank you so much for being here today and contributing to this wonderful conversation. Thank you, Dr. Crane.
Can I add just one more comment?
Absolutely.
I would like to point out that Canvas has a lot of tutorials on how to do peer reviews. And as I mentioned, they have a lot of features in Canvas, and for you to learn about them, there's a lot of tutorials by Canvas that will take you through the process. And it'll take you a little bit of time to look at all the bells and whistles, but they're quite a full feature.
Yes, and if you write your questions to any of us, we'll share those files, we'll answer your questions. That's why we are here, to facilitate these kind of conversations. So definitely we can show you where these tutorials are. Some people like Dr. Sharon will come for assistance. And
you can bet on it.
And that's the whole point, to give these a try because it is a wonderful tool for your students. Next couple weeks, we have more wonderful topics coming your way. Next week, we're going to talk about presentation skills, creating change, transforming the learning of your students through your presentations, visual literacy on the 13th, and on the 20th, a very interesting session on the theory behind gaming used in education. So thank you again, everybody, for coming today, and please write us with your questions. We'll make sure to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
I'd like to thank you both, Lisa, well, Mary, of course, and Michael, because I know that at least the reputation is B School is sort of on the cutting edge of a lot of this stuff. And I have learned so much today, and both of you have terrific models of how to do this.
Thank you.
And so I'm looking forward to seeing more detail on what you're doing and seeing what I can pick and choose from and use this to really enhance my classes. So thank you both very, very much.
And thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you for coming.
Absolutely.